We're not in the business of breaking news, but I think this one is important enough for me to come on and announce it to you as breaking news. And then I'm going to solicit some comments from my friends Terence Bangawakai on the news. So let me just read it to you directly as reported. This is being reported by Agence France Presse. It's titled UN Security Council to hold first meeting on Cameroon. This news was published today, May 5th, 2019. The UN Security Council will hold a first informal meeting on Cameroon this month to discuss a worsening humanitarian crisis that has left 3 million people struggling for food. The United States is organizing the May 13th meeting after persuading African countries on the Council to drop their initial reluctance to talk on the 2-year separatist conflict in Cameroon's west. South Africa, a non-permanent council member, had expressed reservations, arguing that the African Union was leading the international response to the crisis, according to diplomats. It's long past time for the Security Council to address what's going on in Cameroon, where we are seeing a devastating humanitarian crisis, a spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations said Saturday. We hope this meeting will draw more attention to this disaster and encourage a more robust regional and international response by member states, the UN, and civil society in order to prevent the situation from deteriorating even further. That's basically the news. The rest is really commentaries. I'm reluctant to read these because they come as opinion pieces, and some of the data here, I think the data is worse, but I'm going to read as it is reported. In fact, I think some of the sources reporting some of the data is suspicious as far as I'm concerned. And here's what follows. Cameroon is racked by a conflict between separatist and government forces in its English-speaking West, combined with an influx of refugees from the Central African Republic and Nigeria. More than 1 in 6 people in Cameroon, 4.3 million, need humanitarian aid, an increase of 30% from 2018, according to UN aid officials. The meeting will have a particular focus on the separatist conflict, according to a note sent by the US to the Council on Friday and seen by Agence France Presse. More than 560,000 people have been driven from their homes since 2017, including 32,000 who have fled to Nigeria, the note said. Starving children. Rights groups have accused the United Nations of ignoring the conflict in Cameroon, where separatists in English-speaking regions are pushing for independence from the majority French-speaking country. The government has responded with a crackdown, deploying thousands of soldiers, more than 200 members of the security forces, and at least 500 civilians have been killed, according to figures from the International Crisis Group think tank. Cameroon is also reeling from the spillover violence in neighboring Nigeria, which is battling Boko Haram insurgents, and from ongoing tumult in the Central African Republic. 3 million people are in need of food aid. Tens of thousands of children are out of school, and 220,000 children are suffering from acute malnutrition, according to the U.S. note. In February, the government and aid groups launched an appeal for $299 million to fund humanitarian needs, but only 11% of that amount has been raised. Cameroon has not witnessed a humanitarian emergency at such a scale, and the causes of the different crises are but intensifying, said the UN's humanitarian coordinator for Cameroon, Allegra Biochi, in late April. So that is what Agence France Presse, or AFP, is reporting. I am now going to invite comments from my friends Terence Bangawakai.
So, Terence, I want to get your reaction on this breaking news that the UN is calling a meeting of the Security Council for the first time to decide on the humanitarian situation in Cameroon, or in Ambazonia, if you want to be specific.
Well, I think it's long overdue. I think the UN, with the conspiracy of the United Kingdom, abandoned the people of the Southern Cameroons. And in the words of the United Kingdom, these people were viewed as expendable. And we are living today the consequences of that decision. And I think it's only normal that the United Nations returns in a matter of speaking back to its format and clean up the mess. So I think it's a natural progression of the crisis.
Yeah. Did you find it intriguing that it's the United States that's pushing for this meeting, or that has pushed for this meeting?
No, I do not find it intriguing at all, because the other members of the UN Security Council, specifically Britain and France, they have blood on their hands regarding the Southern Cameroons. They're in no position to play a honest broker in this crisis. They cannot take a lead. They have had opportunities before to speak on the issues, and they have abdicated their moral and ethical responsibilities. It is only but natural that it is the United States that has stepped up. As you and I know, the United States had an historical role in ending the French and British colonization in Africa. Well, maybe not the French, but they had an important role in seeing that colonization was brought to an end with the institution of the trusteeship system. And I think it's actually natural that the United States take a lead in this crisis.
Do you find it intriguing that other African states had to be convinced by the United States to support this motion?
I find it very intriguing and disappointing, but really not surprising. You have half of the African continent, well, almost half of the African continent, those client states of France. We know where they will stand. As we saw with the abduction of Siseko Julius Ayub, even a country like Nigeria does the bidding for France. And as for the other smaller African countries, I don't think they have the political fortitude, so to speak, to have an independent voice. The organization that represents African states, the African Union, is almost like an appendage of the Western system. So I'm not surprised at all that the African states, as they've done in the past, showed no leadership. They did not show any leadership during the crisis in Cote d'Ivoire. They did not show any leadership during the crisis in Libya. And obviously, we do not expect them to show any leadership in this crisis in Ambazonia.
Do you think it's because of Musa Faki Mohamad's leadership, or you think it doesn't matter who the head of the African Union was?
It doesn't matter. The gentleman you mentioned is the head of the African Union Commission. It doesn't matter. Paul Kagame, somebody who has experienced the venom of French policy in Africa, was the president of the African Union when the crisis started. I do not remember him making any significant statement. So the African heads of state have completely abdicated any leadership in this crisis, but this is their mode of operation. They always abdicate when serious crisis broke out on the continent. The African Union as an institution is not set up to address serious crisis on the continent.
South Africa was the one trying to give a pushback to the United States that the situation should be allowed in the hands of the African Union. Did that catch you by surprise also?
Not quite. South Africa has benefited a lot from Pan-Africanism. A lot of African nations showed South Africa care and concern and sacrifice for the Africans in South Africa during the apartheid struggle. But since the end of apartheid, South Africa has not played any. They've been very disappointing in their leadership on the continent. They've not played a significant role, and I don't know if South Africa wants to become. They so much want to become part of the so-called international community and part of the West that they refuse to be to be more independent. And this is about the South African elite, and I think they're largely neoliberal elite. But I think there are other voices in South Africa that may think differently. But I'm not surprised that South Africa abdicated once more its duty as a spokesperson for African freedom.
Would you say this is a win against the French, who at the beginning of this struggle were saying that this situation will be resolved internally, and I think La République was also in support of that. Obviously, when France is, La République follows. Do you think this is a defeat of that position?
It's a defeat for France, a defeat for French colonialism in Africa, and I think hopefully it's the dawn of a new day.
What are you expecting by the end of this conference?
Not much. What I hope is that our people continue to fight for their rights, and the future of Ambazonia is in the hands of Ambazonians.
So you really don't think that something good will come out of this for the people of Ambazonia?
No.
So how is it a positive then?
Well, it's a positive in that I think it's a moral booster for the people of Ambazonia, that their voices have been heard and somebody's, maybe talking about it. But I really do not think this is I don't expect anything out of this meeting, which is coming up on May 13th. I don't really expect anything. Let's see what happens. We've been disappointed for so many times before. The international organization that is responsible for this meeting on the 13th of May is the organization that put us into this slavery. Why has it taken them 58 years or 59 years for them to revisit this? Why is it taking the burning of hundreds of villages for them to revisit this? Why has it taken them the murder, the savagery on our people, the burning of the crops and harvests of our people for them to revisit this?
And I would just
I'm really not expecting much. I'm sorry to say that I'm very pessimistic when it comes to the United Nations, because again, like any other, they've left us to be slaughtered by the French.
No, and I think your disappointment is in place because I think we've been failed at every level by the international community, and I share that with you. So what would you leave the people of Ambazonia with? This is my last question to you.
I will leave them with the advice that they must depend on themselves and themselves alone. Thank you.
Now, before you go, please, Sam, I'm sorry. What would you advise the United States? Because it seems like they're at least trying to do something. What's your advice to the United States?
Justice for all.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.